Um, I really think of it when I thought about last year's presentation as compared to now. What do we know now that we didn't know a year ago? And I guess for me, what's different about, I think many of the analogies I made last year were to the 2008, 2009 financial crisis, to this crisis. But what I think reflecting on it, what I think I've come to somewhat of a conclusion of is that it is very different. And it's very different because unlike the previous crisis where really everything did decline, um, not only in Hawaii's economy, but I think also globally, nationally, I think it's become sort of like the book we all should have read in high school, right? Tale of Two Cities, where you've got two segments. One segment in the economy that seems largely unaffected by the pandemic, and another one that's decimated by the pandemic. And so let me give you a very simple example just from, I looked last night at the um, board minute meetings from the Board of Water Supply, and people are paying their water bill on time, more so than any time in the past. People are paying their water bills on time. So what does that tell us, right? That in very good economic years in the past, there were more uncollectible bill payments for your water bill, a pretty essential bill, um, than is the case now. On the other hand, um, you have an increased segment that isn't paying their rent, right? So we can see in this chart here that before COVID, nearly 95% of rental units were paid on time, and that's dipped by 10%, right? And when we look at it by over 60 days, it's obviously over double that amount. So that spells two different, um, it gives you a sense that there's two different economies. And I don't know much about medicine, so all I can say is that at least in Hawaii, um, we are, I think, like in the 10th to 20th um, place in terms of rate of vaccination. So we're clearly above the US average, nearly 45% or so. And when we then turn to the US economy, whenever an economist is asked about the economy, you would seem to talk always about three things, three statistics. You'd look at prices, you'd look at production, you would look at unemployment. So let's just look at those three. This first one is on prices. And we can see that when Dr. Itoga and I gave the presentation, at that point, the concern then would have been about the basically nearly zero increase in prices, which you would think is a good thing, but it's actually, for an economist, is generally not a good thing, because you start to reach a point where if prices aren't increasing, it causes, the simplest way to say it causes a lot of problems in the economy, because the economy is built around small increases in prices over time. Because if the prices fall, my salary doesn't go down just because prices are falling. And you can imagine how that ripples through the economy. Contracts and whatnot don't decline in price because prices are declining. In some sense, it doesn't matter though, because we can see that since the summer, prices have now increased back to their pre-pandemic levels already at this point. Unemployment, this is for the US as a whole. It hasn't reached pre-pandemic levels, but at least as it's officially measured, this is the, those of you who've taken macro, this is our U3 statistic, our official measurement of unemployment. It's higher than it was before the pandemic, but it's certainly down from its peak. And then production, it's back to pre-pandemic levels. So, right, so you get this sense, at least from these statistics, that everything has recovered for the most part. You've got a slightly weaker labor market, but the idea there is that that will get better over time, maybe. Well, how did we get there? Did two big things. Now, when Dr. Itoga and I did this last time, we all would have gotten, I don't know, how much did we get that first check? How much did we get in that first check? 600, 700, but yeah, we had, you know, some few $100. And we all got that. And then, all right, so that would have been the CARES Act and some initial aid. But now compare this to the 2008-2009 crisis. In the 2008-2009 crisis, we had what at that time was unprecedented, $785 billion in, this is the government, the federal government basically issuing debt and giving out cash. So in this case, $750 billion in the 2008-2009 crisis. And I don't know, right? We could add this up now. This adds up to what this is 2, 4, 6, right? Sorry, 2, 4, $6 trillion or so. Right. So in terms of the amount of fiscal support we've given to this crisis, it's dramatically higher. In part, this reflects a lesson that was learned in the 2008-2009 crisis. It took a long time during the Obama administration for the recovery to happen. And this is supposed to be like really push the economy forward. And that's what it's done, right? I mean, $6 trillion in the economy. And then you've got the other side. So there's two segments that can stimulate the economy. You've got the federal government, and then you've got the central bank. And the central bank is doing a bunch of things as well. So if you're an economist, you could, or you've taken Econ 131 or 130, you could read these bullet points and they might make some sense to you. But basically it's saying that the Federal Reserve is also basically increasing the amount of money that's out there, increasing the money supply. So basically, banks have the money to lend out to others, and governments are not going to have, right, like state of Hawaii, right? They had to borrow money to pay for unemployment claims. They had no problem getting that money. There's a lot of money out there. But this is what I mean by it's an odd time. So let's look at this. I got this from the New York Federal Reserve. They do a survey of regular consumers. And it turns out that of the 3 stimulus checks that's been received, people are actually spending less and less of it. And they're saving more and more of it. Oh, I don't have any of it left in my account, so they didn't ask me, but apparently people are not spending it all, which on an individual level is a good thing. But in terms of the purpose of what this was for, that's a bad thing, right? Unemployment insurance is a really good thing because people tend to spend all of that money. People tend to, use it to buy food, pay rent, etc. But when you give individuals, right, or food stamps is another example, right? If we talk about EBT, that's good because generally people go to Safeway, they go to Costco, the money is spent. Here, we're basically saying the government is providing individuals, households with money, and the money is being saved, or it's paying down debt. Again, doesn't seem bad on an individual level, but it's bad from a stimulation perspective. And it also turns out that banks have the exact same problem. Banks also are not lending out money. So this survey, it's been replaced, but it didn't have as good of a picture. But so that got discontinued, this survey got discontinued in September. But what you can see here, think of this as banks not lending out all of their money. And what you can see here is that during the pandemic, banks got really worried and they really didn't lend out a lot of money, but they still haven't lent it out. It's been increased, it's been high ever since the 2008-2009 crisis. So we're kind of we're still in the wake of the 2008-2009 crisis, but this has amplified it 10 years out. Now, I wanted to include this though, because what does it mean if people are saving money? It means that people could spend it on something else. And so this is now, what do the financial markets think the inflation is going to be 10 years from now? What is thought to be the inflation rate 10 years from now? And right now, that it's generally now exceeding 2%, which is kind of the prescribed rate for the central banks. And so it's increasing more and more. So now one of the concerns in the markets, at least even this past month, has been that there's going to be much more inflation, which hasn't been a problem since I was 2 years old. So, we have an economy, fortunately, in the United States that's largely been immune from inflation, rising price problem. And at least the data suggests that's not going to be the case any longer. I'm not a tourism expert. I'm very rarely a tourist, so that's why Dr. Itoga is here. But my transitioning now to kind of like both Dr. Itoga's presentation, but then also a little bit about Hawaii's economy and how it's intricately connected to tourism, is that, right, it's an economy built on tourists coming and then leaving. At least pre-COVID, 10.4 million individuals coming and going. But what seems to have happened, at least in the survey I looked at, there's been a few surveys. Some of the surveys I've looked at has said that the public surveys have changed, that there's at least a growing belief that it's becoming more extractive, that it's not being, that the tourism isn't benefiting the residents, that it's really benefiting the visitors themselves. Something that Dr. Itoga and I kind of briefly talked about last year, but it seems to be more the case now. Now, unfortunately, this is like, we have an economy. We have an economy that's largely built around the collection of the transient accommodation tax. Love it or hate it, it's the tax that drives most government services. And that money is down a lot. And that's because individuals are not coming, they're not spending as much as they did before, or they're spending it in ways where there's not a transient accommodation tax added to what they're buying. One example would be if someone rents a hui or a U-Haul to drive around instead of a car rental, let's say, that would obviously generate a lot of taxes. That's going to hurt the state economy and hurt the county governments. But I think it's also a little bit different too, based on who is coming to Hawaii now. And this will be where Dr. Itoga is more the expert than I, but basically you've got individuals within the United States that are starting to come. And you can see this here, right after the dramatic fall off individuals have in recent months, especially after the vaccines were released, have been coming back, but not from Japan, which is still one of the largest segments, and not from places outside of Japan, which was supposed to be the diversification of tourism, right? Was supposed to be going outside of Japan. But even here, we're not seeing that recovery. So I guess my closing comment about just in general about what I see then in terms of Hawaii's economy is that a year later, we talked about Hawaii's economy moving away from tourism and that it could be so many other things. But I don't know, the best way to clarify this would be like, I don't know, falling in love with, I'm just thinking of this analogy now, falling in love with a used car that's really bad, but continuing to put money into it because you really love the car, or sticking around with, continuing to do something even though you know it's not good to do it anymore. And that's kind of the sense I get about this, is that the general sentiment is that tourism is not benefiting Hawaii as much as it used to. But as even the director of UHERO points out, you can't get rid of tourism because that's actually what's driving Hawaii's economy still. So to do it, you are kind of hobbling the economy for probably a pretty long period of time. So my last comment about this is, in terms of Hawaii's economy, I'm actually not sure where we're at, that we're any different than we were a year ago. And that I'm sort of expecting that largely Hawaii's comeback is still going to be largely dependent on the comeback of tourism, which will be then related to all the health things and all the other things that are outside of my expertise. Okay, that's what I have to say. Let's see. All right. Which one do you want?
I'll do mine.
You, then I'll hit you on mine.
Okay, welcome. So excited to be here and have this opportunity. You have my class that I'm covering this the COVID-19 pivot within our class. Oh, okay, that's fine. So I'm happy to do this again, and if you take my classes in 2021, I will probably also share some of this presentation. So going over, this is my presentation from last year, April 2020, and it is crucial to our presentation for today on Hawaii's Economy 3.1. Thank you to Tom for sharing.
I came up with that.
Economic perspective, and I'm going to take a different perspective.
That's good. That's good.
So, okay. And these are the numbers from 2019. We had over 10 million visitors. I went over that, Tom went over that, so it's great. You know,
Oh, Holly, you'll want to unmute.
okay.
There you go.
I muted myself.
Oh,
You're good now.
we had the high spending, the lower spending tourists, but more tourism now. And so this was really an amazing time to pivot. And that was the title. It was going to be like the COVID-19 pivot, like, oh my gosh, the wildlife is coming back, you know, our environment is regenerating itself. Locals are starting to like appreciate our islands and stay here, do staycations. And if we could use, you know, work with the owners and operators and things like, and other players within the hospitality and tourism industry to really focus on like regenerating Hawaii's tourism and our community and our land and our culture. Okay, so now 2021 and we're doing our presentation, and I hope that you guys really did. Is that you in the picture? Yeah, I hope you guys really did get the chance to go out and enjoy Hawaii. This is my girlfriends and I surfing Waikiki uncrowded, which was wonderful and magical, not just because we surfed Waikiki uncrowded, but also because we found parking like right there, like right across the street from the surf break. So it was just a really fun time in the beginning of COVID because it was a chance to enjoy Hawaii. And I never thought I would ever in my lifetime get to experience not just Oahu, but I also took the opportunity to go to some of the neighbor islands. And I didn't realize, we always think of Oahu as so populous, but going to Kauai or Maui or Big Island, you know, it's also, or Hawaii Island, it's also so crowded too with tourism. So getting to enjoy it without tourists was really a special, and I think maybe once in a lifetime opportunity. So it really was magical. Last year I shared that number, 10 million. This year, I'd like to share 0 from the cruise industry. And this is an important number that I will talk about later in the slide. So 54, it's how many Japanese tourists came to Hawaii in June 2020, which compared to the year before was 126,000. So that is a significant drop. It's not even on as a comparison, it's not even like 99.9%, it's literally 100% drop in tourism. The summer months are usually our busiest months, as well as the Christmas, New Year's holiday and 3-day weekends, right? So to go from over 126,000 to 54, obviously these were the headlines dominating our news cycle, you know, economic devastation, when will tourism come back, how many years is it going to take, are we going to lose our residents as they, you know, move to the mainland for other opportunities. There was just so much I want to be respectful because I know I talked about surfing Waikiki Uncrowded, which was really fun, but it does not balance out the fact that businesses closed, restaurants shut down, people lost their jobs, their livelihood, people had to pivot their businesses, industries, and it's still going on with the economic hardship in Hawaii. So please don't think that I'm definitely aware of our economic situation. And of course, I look forward to the return of our economy thriving again, back to full capacity and even better than it was before. But from the tourism perspective, I'm just going to offer you a different way to look at this. Okay, so once busy Waikiki was now empty. This is March 26th. This is the picture on that day. This is a fun little video. I can share a copy of my PowerPoint slide so you can click through all the links and everything. If you take Sustainability and Tourism, Post 421 next semester, which is going to be a required host class in the future. I know you'll get a jump start on it. Okay, so and then this was from June, and I don't know if any of you guys had the opportunity to do the bike through Waikiki, or you saw it in the news, where since Kalakaua was shut down and dead, the Hawaii Bicycle Association set this up. And it's kind of funny because it turned into quite a crowded activity when we were kind of like in the midst of like COVID. So I won't play the video right now in the interest of time, but again, you can click through it yourself. But it was actually a great way to be outside and enjoy Waikiki again in a way that, you know, was fun and special. I think we can do this again though, because Waikiki is able to shut down for parades and such things. But that was a really special event that they had. And this is from my previous presentation. It says, you know, now that we're in this COVID-19 pandemic, like what can we do? And I think we did it. I think we did the things that we could do. I think we bought local. I thought there was so many like buy local campaigns, support your local businesses. You know, I spent that, you know, I spent that CARES money.
I don't have the money.
I went shopping and was supporting our local businesses, you know, trying to do takeout from our local restaurants and things like that. I know Central Pacific Bank had a great program where you could, you know, buy and get it, half of it paid for and things like that. And but beyond that, there were so many opportunities to support different local businesses. Of course, hiring, I don't know how much hiring was going on at that time, but staying local. And, you know, if you know, of all the people that Hawaii, I know that everybody likes to come to Hawaii, but everybody in Hawaii likes to travel too, you know? I mean, Vegas is a destination, a popular destination for a reason. So I think the people that were normally traveling were, you know, staying in Hawaii, doing the staycation. So it really was stimulating our economy. And, you know, we were getting some really quality time with our friends and our family, or whoever your circle was, you know. I had my whole family together. So there was 18 of us in our house, in my brother's house. My sister flew in from Seattle. So we really got some quality family time. We did do our COVID testing, and that was our bubble, you know. So it really was a great opportunity to spend time with our family and loved ones that we might not have had before. Really, really a lot of time. Okay, so now these are the headlines from this month, actually March, April. Okay. So I was on a phone call, or not on phone, I was on a webinar, and, you know, there's been so many of them this year. So I was listening to the GM, or the sales director from Kaanapali Beach Hotel. This is right before spring break, and they actually oversold their rooms because they had renovations going on and things like that, but they sold out. They did a great job of, you know, Maui did a great job of filling up their hotel rooms, whether it was staycation locals, where they're marketing, where their mainland tourists were coming in. But the Maui hotels were almost up to pre-pandemic levels. If not, some hotels probably were at pre-pandemic levels. As if any of you guys have tried to rent a car, especially on the neighbor islands, there are no cars. And if there are cars, it's no joke. When I saw this news article come out, I was like, okay, let me just try. I'll try like different dates, because I want to go to the neighbor islands for, you know, the summer holidays or something like that, especially with the COVID vaccine passport for Hawaii. So there's no cars. And if there were, They say around 600. The ones I saw were like $1,000 a day. There's like one option left, I think, for some of the days, and some days there are just no options left. So it is and if you have been through Waikiki, this is a picture from April. This is Waikiki. It's crowded. It is back. It is one of the busiest places in Oahu to be, in my opinion. And as you can see from the Civil Beat article, What Slow Recovery to Tourism, we have a lot of tourists. We stayed in Waikiki during spring break. We could not get a reservation. We should have made reservations in advance. I didn't realize that. So it took us 2 hours to get takeout one night. So the next day we tried to make reservations for the following day, and the only reservation we could get for dinner was at 2:30 p.m. So we took it. We ate dinner at 2:30. And we also waited over 2 hours to get into dinner that night because we just didn't have reservations. So it was really crowded. I know restaurants are still operating, at COVID capacity levels. So I think there still is some recovery that will happen with the restaurant industry. Okay, so we're returning to pre-pandemic levels. So to me, it's kind of almost like instead of the pivot, we're now like 360. And what can we do? And number one, I still think, UH hasn't gone back into full in-person classes. Traffic that has come back, but not as much as it was before. So I still think we can really enjoy Hawaii and remember what we're, trying to preserve, and remember why we love it here so much, and we need to really focus on our values. And what are our values? And I will talk a little bit more about regenerative tourism, which is the new sustainability in tourism, which there's an opportunity for tourism, not just to sustain itself, but to actually improve the destination. Okay, so sustainability in Hawaii, these are some of the government some of the organizations. Hawaii Ecotourism is not government, but it does get support. The Green Business Program out of the Hawaii State Energy Office, and recognizes facilities that are implementing green practices. The Aloha Plus Challenge Dashboard, it's a commitment with public and private sectors. And then we have our government sustainability plan, and it's our strategy for sustainability as well as climate change. And then this is a proposal that we've studied before, is our green passport. In 2018, there was a deficit that if we had charged our 10 million visitors, so it must have been around 385 million, 3850 to enter or to leave or to come to Hawaii, then we could solve our budget deficit. So that's something that is of interest. You can click on all these links if you are interested. And then of course we have our HTA, Hawaii Tourism Authority strategic plan. And this is our 20 to 25. So this was actually created before COVID. And I'm not going to go into too much detail about it, except for that the 4 pillars of the plan are the natural resources, Hawaiian culture, community, and brand marketing. So, I was a little bit hopeful. I saw this article I think it came out in October of 2020, and it says charging higher fees to tourists at state parks. So it's like, okay, great. Even though we're in a pandemic and still trying to get our economy and things back, this is actually a strategy that's going to be beneficial for our parks. In 2000, it was actually implemented to have an entrance fee. So it's $1 to get into Diamond Head State Park. And it's for locals or tourists, it's $1. Okay, that's 2000, not 2020, that was in 2000. So since then, there has not been an increase or, a hike to the entrance fee for Diamond Head Park. So Diamond Head National Park, where you go up the stairs. How it can offset the Parks and Rec and the Parks and Rec and their budget deficit, and and Department of Land, and supporting them to make it that are supporting our tourist destinations that people even come to Hawaii for, right? To help maintain them and manage them. So it was exciting to see that this kind of not legislation, it's not in the legislature yet, but this kind of ideas are being proposed and thought about, and what we can really do to offset some of our costs. Okay, and then this is, sorry, Hawaiian culture. A lot of our students, usually we actually get to go on tours and we actually get to go to like the convention and we get to learn. But the Native Hawaiian Hospitality Association, they provided amazing webinars. I attended them, our students attended some of them online. It's still, I mean, I miss the in-person tours, especially like, you know, in Waikiki, but this is a way I got to actually learn about Maui and Hawaii Islands, and I normally wouldn't have taken a tour there. So it was really nice to be able to have these kind of resources that Hawaii Tourism Authority's budget supports. And just yesterday and Monday, we had the Hawaii Tourism invited the entire community to listen in on question and answer and chat in with our opinions on our Oahu Destination Management Action Plan. It's the only island that still has not put out their action plan. Maui, Kauai, I think, and Hawaii Islands all have, and it includes, you know, resident sentiment and how to build our community and some of the issues facing our islands. And I think on all our islands, community and resident sentiment is a big part of it. So getting that input is a really great opportunity that we can participate. And these are like ways we can participate. So whether, you know, we're getting Native Hawaiian training or just adding to our community for our sustainability and tourism class, another plug, you know, we had the opportunity where we usually volunteer as a group, as a class, but because of our Zoom, because of our situation, you know, the students really had an opportunity to volunteer on their own. And I'm so impressed. Some of the students came up with like wonderful ideas and they were able to volunteer, and some who, you know, maybe had COVID restrictions or things like that, you know, they made donations to their charities that are helping Hawaii or volunteering here in UH West Oahu with the Nui campaign with Dr. Meyer and growing coconuts and the Hawaii Food Bank, and, you know, just donating and supporting, doing beach cleanup, sustainable coastlines. So there's just so many ways that we can get involved in our community. And if we really look for it, I mean, I think alone in our email alone, there's already so many opportunities that we get all the time. Okay, now moving on to brand marketing. The strategic plan is a little bit longer than just, you know, these. So what I really pulled out of it was supports Hawaii's economy by effectively attracting higher spending, lower impact travelers. Okay. Know our numbers are for the month of June. I know our numbers are still low, but if you can see right here, this chart, Japan, other Asia, Oceania, our international travelers, these are the high spending tourists. And these are the tourists that are not coming to Hawaii right now because of, even though Hawaii is allowing them in with quarantine or, you know, a negative COVID test, when they go back to their country, regardless of a negative COVID test, they still have to quarantine anyway. So we still see extraordinarily low numbers. The flights have not come back yet from these international destinations. So what we really are attracting right now is our American travelers. As you can see, our American travelers are some of the lowest spending demographic, which continues our path of more tourists to Hawaii with less money going into our economy. And I want you guys to think about that and take that into consideration, you know, as we move forward. So when I say 360, I really do think we're back to a 360 of being on the same trajectory we were pre-COVID, of having more tourists with less spend. And how are we going to change that? Well, one thing is that's happening is the HTA's budget is getting cut. So we will have less money for HTA's community programs and such things like that. So it's already through legislation. That's one thing that we have to consider as we move forward. And the other thing, on a positive note, I'd like to leave you guys with is that to really focus on the concept of regenerative tourism, and the part of brand marketing that I didn't focus on is to really attract the high spending tourist that cares about our environment and wants to leave Hawaii, not just how they found it, but even better. So having that green tax, having that person that's willing to pay like a green fee, an extra, you know, however much money on their stay in Hawaii. And that's hopefully the kind of tourists that we can attract, whether, and it's not saying, excuse me, I would like to backtrack on my high spending. I would like to say the type of tourist that cares about not just sustaining Hawaii, but regenerating tourism or the environment, our land, our culture, our community in Hawaii. The tourist that's going to be conscious of staying on the trails and going to the beach parks that they're allowed to go on. The tourist that really cares about, enjoying Hawaii and being thankful for all the natural resources that we do have. So I definitely don't have all the answers, but I have seen hope in our students and our classes. I see great projects and great ideas, how we regenerate tourism, how to attract the type of tourist that cares about sustainability. And I look or anything that we can talk about that you guys have. I don't know if has there been any questions in the chat box?
There were a few. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're fine.
Okay. Here, let's come to
well,
that
yeah.
one.
Let's see here. Yeah.
And then I'm going to stop my share.
Yep, that's fine. Let's see where we were at here. Yeah, there was some. Well, there was. We had some comments about both. Some about diversification. So I was mentioning something about. One of the plans that was early in the legislative session was some money was allocated to try to get a company from the mainland to come to Hawaii, like a Fortune 500 company. So something that happens a lot on the mainland is the states are all in this competition to all grab headquarters from one state and move it to another state, right? So a bunch of money was given to Tesla to move it from California to Texas, and you get this kind of shuffling around. I don't know. It seems a little difficult to do that in Hawaii, though, because we're 2,500 miles away, even from the mainland. And then most of your customers, depending on your business, if they're at least on the East Coast, that's going to be 5-6 hour time difference. So we're kind of, in some sense, my conclusion, even on the chat, was I don't know where being isolated in COVID was a blessing, right? Because the impact was smaller than other places, but it can also be a curse in terms of diversifying the economy. That was mine while you were chatting. I don't know. I get the one thing maybe you could talk about, I was curious about, was I'd heard that some of the things also with HTA was they were having a leadership change as well at the same time. Is that right? Like they were.
Well, it's actually kind of interesting. For the first time, HTA is president CEO is John DeFries, who is a native Hawaiian and who has run NAHA, the Hospitality Association, as well as run some of the bigger developments on Big Island. So I think he comes from a background of community as well as economic growth and development. So it's exciting to see what he will do in his position as president of HTA, but with a much smaller budget, I think it will be obviously more difficult for him to execute change in the same manner. So we will see what happens in the legislature right now. And it could be a temporary cut, hopefully. Yeah.
How does, I guess the other thing I was curious about, and I don't want to dominate here, but the other thing I was thinking about too when I was making this was how do things like even like the Olympics moving to this summer, right? Like how does that affect things, right? Because then a Japanese tourist maybe is less likely to leave that island and come to.
I think regardless of the Olympics, I think Japan has its own issues in general with the spike in, COVID numbers that they're having right now, preparing for the Olympics, as well as not having, I think, vaccine supply.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, getting the Japanese tourists back to Hawaii, I think there's so many, not just, with other, I think they have so many things going on with their country that they have to work on.
Maybe we should have vaccine tourism, right? We could have people come and get a shot and stay.
If they're willing to pay and contribute.
Stay 2 weeks and then get their second shot, right?
And contribute to our economy and pay for a donation, a hefty donation. That's kind of like selling medicine, though. I feel like that's getting into a whole nother.
Well, so the other thing I had read about was that people were saying that having to do the COVID test at the airport was a perfect test study of whether people were going to be willing to pay like that green impact fee, right? If people had to pay $20 or $30 to get the test, and then,
Totally.
right, that was a perfect example, a market example of people are willing to pay this small fee to come to the islands.
Yes. Well, so I think it depends. Obviously, for us in Hawaii, it was very like we either have to pay the COVID test to go to the neighbor islands, or if you were one of the lucky ones to be on Kaiser insurance, you know,
Yeah.
that's free. So I'm not exactly sure what the medical the costs were of the test in the mainland, but I'm sure it's similar to something in Hawaii. So showing that they were willing to pay that, $100 or
Yeah.
100 plus, especially with the rapid testing and things like that, I think
Yeah.
that is a perfect example of tourists willing to pay that fee.
And they'd still be
Yeah.
paying it now. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you.
Let's see. Has anyone said anything?
I just want to acknowledge that, yes, thank you, Teresa. Those U-Hauls, right? Isn't that crazy, but so smart? And then Lanai is working. Roxanne, are you from Lanai? It's so we actually got to visit and go to Sensei because they had that amazing Kama'aina rate. Oh my gosh, which was usually, I think it was going to be priced at like $5,000 a night before COVID. That was going to be the opening price of Four Seasons, and then it was, I think, $600 a night, including airfare from Honolulu. So it was actually cheaper to maybe go to Lanai than anywhere else, but it was really crowded. It was like everything was booked because you have to make reservations. Yeah, okay, and it's running. Oh, the promotion's running again. Okay, well, thanks for joining us from Lanai, Roxanne. Was there anything else? Tourism? I think a lot of it was economics within the chat. So
Yeah, because only because I had the chance to do it.
Yeah, and Nayo, I support moving not away, but I support like starting other, putting a dent in our huge dependency on tourism and infusing other businesses as well as entrepreneurship and industries, whether the move towards more high tech or service-based industries. I think that's all something that we've really seen a big push. At UH, we have our Venture Capital Association, and the ability, even if you're not a student at UH, not a student at any of the students in the UH system can also participate, in getting mentorship and support from the entrepreneurship center from UH system. So I think there's so many exciting things that we should be focusing on, and I agree with you.
There's this other impact. The one I was reading about yesterday was this lingering effect of how do people, individual households, how do they respond to a crisis, right? So the idea was you get a stimulus payment, you don't spend it. But then there was this whole other idea too, right? That people that actually like plan their family size, right? That they then say, dude, I'm not going to have kids, right? I'm not going to expand my family size during this time. So the idea was that the birth rate has fallen to some record low numbers because of individuals waiting even longer now to expand their family. And then I was thinking back to examples of like the Japanese economy, right? Which the problem was declining birth rates to a point where then you have to really stimulate people to have children, right? And to create incentives for it. So it's the one thing I guess I come to a conclusion with as well is that we could probably have version 3.2 next year, 3.3, right? Because the lingering effects of this are going to be longer than COVID's going to last. Because we're still in the wake again of the 2008, 2009 crisis. And it seems like this now just complicates it further.
Oh, definitely. I think we've yet to feel the economic impact of not collecting taxes in 2020, and as well as the unemployment and things like that, and people going back to business with unemployment or their unemployment time running out. So we still have yet to feel the repercussions. I also think on a social and educational level with some, the disparity between schools going back, private schools versus public schools versus parents that left their jobs. So there's just so many, and the emotional toll and our physical well-being. I don't know about any of you guys.
Maybe does that go back to the comment I made in the beginning though too, where I was saying like it is kind of tale of two cities, right? So again, you've got individuals, like my oldest child we had to do homeschooling for like a month or two. and then it ended, right? And so I know my experience is very different than most other families.
Totally.
But again, I would imagine that the choices I made as an individual household are different because of the pay that I receive versus another family where it's like the sugar truck, dumping its load 1 month because tourists are coming in the summer, and then living lean in October. It worries me, I guess, not going outside of economics, a little bit on a social level, right? That one thing we talk about in Hawaii, right, is that there is this bifurcation, right? This bifurcation of within society of those that own, those that participate in certain industries in this economy, and those who don't, and service the rest. And it seems like that's only amplified more. It seems. I don't know. It's just. It seems like it has, hasn't it? Like, because now you've got, right. It seems like the debate now is this whole. I mean, the people I had an event before, and it was people that own apartment buildings, and right there sitting and complaining about, right. I mean, but
it's real.
But I'm saying, like, it's when you listen to them, right. I mean, it's kind of like the person that more money, more problems. I don't know how to say it, like, right. But they're complaining, right, about they've got all these expenses and whatnot. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking too, well, there's another side of that equation where someone's renting, right, and is in most cases is experiencing real hardship, right? There's not, I think, we might in our heads think everyone's just like not paying their rent, and isn't experiencing any hardship. But I think for the most part, most people no one wants to not pay their rent, I think, for the most part. What do I know? But it seems like things like that are going to be very difficult to end, right? Like, how do we end the fact that people can get kicked out, right? Like, how are we going to end that in a humane way? It seems very difficult to, or end unemployment insurance. It seems hard to. Okay, I'll start talking.
No, you have a question from, and then we also have Olivia.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, these are both questions.
Okay. Okay, let me read this here. I'm sharing with you described it as a sunk cost fallacy. Yeah. So in the case of our dependence on tourism and the thought of that as a sunk cost. So the economic notion of a sunk cost is that when you're making a decision, you don't take into account the decision that led you to that point, right? So if I'm deciding $50 membership fee I paid to go to the gym in the first place, like, I just think about what's it going to cost to stay in it for another month. Yeah, I mean, there is an extent to which we have built a tourism economy, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've built we don't have a great airport, right? But we built something that is was originally designed to get people to Waikiki. Now it's built to get people to Kapolei, right? And to the west side. And then go to the North Shore to go to Polynesian village and then come back, right? But we built an economy largely around that. It's not necessarily a sunk cost, but it would certainly be something where the cost to transition would be outside of what we could probably afford, right? So could we become a manufacturing economy? We probably could, but all the exporting costs would be so huge that it would make it very difficult. Our harbor would be undersized, all these things. And then, what was the comment?
Olivia was saying that you guys said earlier, no one's really spending. So where's the economy currently standing?
I don't know. In this case, the best analogy I can think of is it's right. It's right before someone is gonna just start yelling, but they haven't started yelling yet, or before a child's about to cry and they haven't started crying yet. Like it's got all of the elements that you know that the next, or like the movie where you anticipate the next move, right? That the person like storms out of the room or something like that. So what I'm saying to that is, the one thing we cannot say at this point is that the economy hasn't been stimulated enough. Like if we were to do another round of COVID, COVID stimulus payments, as many have said, we haven't even spent most of the one from December, let alone January and now March. So we don't really need to stimulate the economy more. We know that people have the money. Well, again, without the exception of the two of us, we don't have the money in our checking account, but people do have the money in their checking account to spend it. Which is then why I think that the only way, for instance, my biggest concern as an economist now is inflation, price inflation, and the idea that it's all going to be fueled by the fact that people at some point will spend the money, right? So people will do the staycation and maybe not shop. Well, maybe shop locally, but most people still care a lot about prices and whatnot. It's go on, sorry.
Oh no, I mean, just an answer. I think you're looking at Roxanne's question. I think that, it might not make as much of a will make a difference to the businesses that are here in Hawaii, especially the smaller local, especially when it's like privately owned. When we're talking more so restaurants, then we don't have too many locally owned hotels and things like that. But it's still providing jobs for our local kama'aina. So anytime that you can stimulate, like, by all means, I am not encouraging spending just to stimulate our economy and do your civic duty, but I'm encouraging spending if you have the money and responsibly, and the choice between supporting, different types of businesses that maybe we could be more cautious about, like who, or think twice, about what type of business and where the bottom line of the money that is going to be.
But think about like that restaurant card, right? So the restaurant card was it was a good idea
Yeah.
though, right? Because it was designed that it was stimulus money that the state had received.
Yes.
And then you identify a segment of the economy that's most affected, the restaurant industry, and then you give a card that's limited to use at those places.
Totally.
Right. So I mean it
actually was brilliant, because instead of giving a payout to the restaurant industry, it actually gave them a way to work and not just give money without doing something.
If you had a bad restaurant, no one's going to go to you, right? I mean,
but with some of the other money, it was more so about like if you qualify. But this one was like, hey, you got to work for your stimulus kind of. So which I'm not
it's hard to say though, right? But it's hard to say too, right? So we think the restaurant industry, hotels, it's different, right? Because hotels, the ownership is very different, right? I mean, for most of even the hotels, correct me if I'm wrong, right? For the hotels, even in Waikiki, they're owned. They've got a name like a Sheraton, but they're a franchise of a different corporation.
The operators
or
an owner,
but they're not. Those aren't island based.
Right, and the majority are, their headquarters are not in Hawaii.
Yeah, so it's hard. So I mean, the restaurant stimulus was a pretty good.
Yeah, it really was.
Yeah. Okay. So
not that we got it, but the other
I didn't get it. Yeah, but it was a
it.
good stimulus. Yeah.
It really was. I don't know. I feel like this was a really great presentation, and we'd like to end on this high note. So if no one has any other, or if you want to have your last comments, are you sure? No. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Did I cut you off? Okay. No. We want to thank everybody for coming and attending, and I would like to end on, to please enjoy Hawaii and to take advantage of the opportunities that we have, and to support our local businesses, of course, locally owned businesses. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye.